come on in, sit near the front, don't sit near the back. Like, we're not going to bite. Like, try to just, we don't want too much space in the front that's empty. So if you can, just kind of move all your way. I'm Greg. I'm the head of marketing here at Switch. Yeah, we're really looking forward to having you part of this conversation. We will wait just like a hot 30 seconds just for people to flow in. But in the meantime, would love to introduce you to the chat. So there's a chat on the right-hand side, which is your way to talk directly to us. Have any questions you have in the chat. I will be here chatting to anybody who wants to chat about any issues while the presentation is going on or otherwise, but like, let us know where you're coming from. And if you have any questions off the top of things you want to see from Elisa and from Thomas, have at it, share. Hi, Kamal, nice to meet you. Welcome. But now we are one off the top. I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to pass it to these two guys to kick it off. So who's first? Thomas, you up first? Who's taking it away?
I'll take it away.
Great. Take it away.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar today. My name is Elisa. I am one of Switch's West Coast EV charging experts. I primarily work on projects in California and Nevada, and my role really encompasses guiding our clients through their EV charging journey. And so a lot of what we're going to cover today is what I do on a day-to-day basis. Thomas.
And hey, everybody. Thomas Martin coming in from the East Coast. And my role here is a solutions expert. So everything from understanding a building's electrical capacity to getting the technology in the ground. That's where I come in. And Elise and I are hopefully going to be a good pair to describe the entire journey and all the decisions you might want to consider throughout that process. And our goal here is really to educate you, the listener, to make an educated EV charging decision, regardless if it's with Switch or not. So all the information we're giving you is came from years of experience on both our parts, and we figured we'd summarize that and arm you with the right questions to ask whoever you work with along the way. And so, Elisa, we should, I guess, get going. We're 3 past the hour.
Let's do it. I think we're going to cover our agenda next. So we've got a lot of information packed into the agenda today. We're going to try and make things as simple as possible. Whether you're new to the EV charging space or you're a seasoned veteran, we think there's some good information for everybody. We'll start by talking about why EV charging. Obviously, EV charging is a buzzword. If you're here, you've heard it a million times, and we'll talk about why it's important now. Then we'll go into the key questions to consider when embarking on an EV charging project. Then we'll go into the tech. This is where Thomas is going to take over and talk about hardware and software and the path forward. Really, the goal of this webinar is to make sure that you feel confident in the planning, installing, managing, and service steps, whether you're going with Switch or a different EV charging provider. A little background on Switch. We were established in 2016, and we have over 18,000 chargers in our network with a remarkable network uptime of 99.7%. And this is something we really pride ourselves on. Uptime is one of the key considerations you want to take into account because it's going to reflect how often those charging stations are operational. Switch at our core is a software company. We are hardware agnostic, meaning we work with many different types of manufacturers, and this allows us to give our clients a highly customizable and flexible solution. So as you know, the EV charging has flourished over the years, and as the industry has matured, so has Switch. We initially started by focusing on the multifamily space, but over the years we've adapted and we're now able to support other asset groups such as the workplace, retail locations, public parking, and hospitality. And so the recommendations and key considerations we're going to go over today really cover all of these property types. And what Switch offers is an end-to-end solution. So we start with the design. We're going to ask you questions around what your goals are for the project. How many chargers do you want to install? Where are these going to be located? What does the electrical infrastructure look like? And with that information, we'll be able to define the work scope. Once we have that, we can price the hardware, the software, and the installation. For the install piece, Switch actually doesn't do any of the work on the ground, but we do have a network of trusted partners that we can bring in on the project. We're also happy to work with an electrician of your choice. And then management of the system in the long run. This is really where the software piece comes in, and Thomas is going to dive into that further in the presentation. So why EV charging now? Obviously, there's been a lot of momentum behind the industry, and we have a couple of stats that will help tell the story. So EV sales are projected to hit 53% of all new cars in 2030. You know, the news will have a lot of stuff out there where it's saying adoption is going down, adoption is going up. But if you look at the data, what it shows is that the exponential trend towards this figure continues. And in response to that, we need to make sure our infrastructure can support it. And then we have tons of chargers in our network. And through that data, we found that 80% of charging happens when or where drivers are spending extended periods of time. So this is going to be workplace applications, where they live, and they really are looking for charging where it's most convenient. And then there are a lot of incentives. We'll touch on this a couple of times throughout the presentation, but obviously infrastructure costs can be the biggest hurdle in these types of projects. And we want you to know that there are resources out there to help offset this burden. So the plan, what key questions to consider? I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, and hopefully we will cover most of them, if not all. But again, if there are questions that we've missed, feel free to put them in the chat. So Thomas, what type of chargers are available, or what type of chargers do I need?
Yeah, it's typically the start of the journey. Everyone thinks the hardware. But the way I would respond to that question is before we think about what type of chargers, we have to understand what's available to us. And I just want to quickly summarize the terms in the industry. Level one is, the standard wall outlet that you see, in any room, any household. This is going to charge the car, but it's going to take a while. And it's likely not going to suffice for the average driver. Where in the industry, the workhorse of EV charging, the one that's doing the majority of charging transactions, is what we call level two. This strikes the balance between economics as well as performance for the vehicle. And so you're gonna be charging the cars in 4 to 6 hours, depending on how full they are. And the application is a medium dwell time. And so for workplaces, commercial, multi-unit residential, this is the solution. And the reason why we don't install level 3 or DC fast charging in every building is because the costs are exponential with the speed of charging. And so the cost of one DC fast charging, you could use that same money to install 10 or 15 level 2s. And so we need to think about, what are we trying to optimize for? Quick transactions, maybe if you're along a highway, rest stop, or are we trying to maximize convenience, which is I get home, I have a plug, speed doesn't matter, I plug in and I forget about it. And that second option is what we see the majority of the industry doing. They're not going for speed, they're going for accessibility of plugs, so you can set and forget and your car is charging, as long as it's parked. All of us here on the webinar, our cars could be charging.
So how many chargers should I install?
Good question. How many depends on the building, but there's no silver bullet there. What we basically try and get buyers to do to educate themselves on their own use case is use the stats, which, one of them being the one Elisa mentioned, which is it's projected 53% of car sales in 2030 will be EV, and we're well on our way trending that direction. But also, go through a walk in your parking lot, whether it's during the day or in the evening when the tenants are there. And you could also send out a survey and just seeing, you know, at what pace do we expect electric vehicles to come to this property? And this is a number of ways to just better educate yourself on your use case. I'd love it if we could work with statistics, but that's not consistent across all the unique tenants and buildings. And so that's why we like to promote, get to know your tenants. We've got plenty of surveys we've developed that we can pass on to make it easy on you. And the goal there is just making an educated, not guess, but an educated decision on what's an appropriate size of installation.
Yeah,
And
and
so
once yeah.
go ahead.
So once you know how many chargers you want to install, another important question is how many chargers can I install?
And that's where I come in as the solutions expert, knowing all the technology. But we typically start with looking at what is required to get it done electrically speaking. And this is just so we can identify any potential constraints early in the conversation. And the reason we do that is just we want to get a lay of the land for each unique building before we start throwing numbers out, things like that.
And the budget talk. Obviously, this is an important discussion to have with yourself when embarking on any big purchase. So one question you might want to ask is, how much available capital do I need for this project? Again, also, like, what kind of ROI would I be looking for? Or what preferred payback period would I need to feel comfortable making this purchase? Another avenue might be wanting to lower your CapEx costs and focusing on OpEx costs. And so that's an entirely different conversation, and there are options for that as well. And then lastly, incentives and credits, doing some investigation with your provider's team to know what kind of rebates might be available to offset your investment. So we'll dive into the system and the tech. Thomas, can I just buy a level 2 charger, install it, and start charging?
As much as I would love to say yes, or well, you can technically speaking, but we need to think about what would be the repercussions if we were to just install any charging station. And so, in order to do that, we need to break down what is the use case for an EV charger and what is required for it to be successful. And so the diagram I pulled up on screen is what we call the four pillars of EV charging operation. You've got the hardware, the infrastructure, the stuff that you can touch and feel. You've got the management software that is everything to do with setting it up correctly, payments, access control, things like that. You have the driver experience, which could be credit card readers, the mobile app, the interface for the people using them, as well as the O&M support. So what happens if something goes wrong? Who's going to respond to that? And so if I were to just buy any EV charger, from Home Depot and install it, they're non-networked. And what you'll find very quickly is that EV drivers will find a free plug and they're going to exploit it. You're going to have somebody charging there all the time for free, and you have no control over that. We saw this early in the industry where, back in 2015, 2016, when EVs started to hit the roads, there were a lot of free chargers just to promote access. But what a lot of people realized is if it's free, they will come, and it becomes very chaotic on the property. You'll be attracting non-tenants, people from neighboring communities. And from an operational standpoint, it creates a lot of headaches. And so in today's presentation, I want to talk to you through these four segments to get your mind thinking about, okay, how am I going to apply it at my own property? So first, let's get into the actual chargers themselves and the infrastructure.
So what should I look for when purchasing a level 2 charger?
If there's one technical spec, I can throw a lot of specs on you coming from the tech side, but I realize that not everyone has time to be reading spec sheets all day like me. So if there's one technical spec you take away from today's presentation, it's the following. We call it OCPP, Open Charge Point Protocol. And what this is an open standard for all the hardware, all the charging hardware. And what it allows you to do as a purchaser and operator of these stations is have freedom of choice for who you work with as the network provider, being Switch. And so if you adopt an open charge point protocol charging station, and let's just say Switch doesn't live up to our expectations on the service, you can pick up the phone, call a new service provider, and get new service, similar as you would internet or a cell phone plan. And the benefit here is that you're not locking yourself into a specific network, and it holds, people like us accountable, because the uptime rates that we advertised earlier in the presentation, 97%, we're held accountable, and we know that our customers can take their business elsewhere, right? We don't lock them into a proprietary system. And so when it comes to hardware, we work with all the big brands, all the recognizable brands, LG, ABB, Siemens, Wallbox, you name it. And our goal here is just to provide the best recommendation based on our experience, knowing that everything we're recommending complies with that OCPP protocol. And to, I guess, use some familiar terminology in the real estate market, de-risking the asset is a very, very important consideration when you're looking at large investments in the property. And I can draw on a couple examples there, but we'll keep moving.
Yeah, I definitely think that is one of the key considerations. Can you speak to any others that might be needed in addition?
Yeah, so I talked chargers, but EV chargers are not the only hardware component to the first pillar that we're discussing. So there's EV chargers and all the accessories that come with it, like OCPP, the hardware, the pedestal, and the cable retractors like we see in the photo on screen. But there's also the electrical, and this is where working with a trusted electrical partner really makes or is really important, where someone who's dealt with EV charging projects in the past is going to know how to do it most efficiently in your building. And Elisa mentioned Switch does not have electricians on staff, but we've got a nationwide network of qualified electricians to do this work. They've seen hundreds of projects and they know how to do it most efficiently. And so that's really what we're trying to promote, is we bring in all the experts to meet the needs of the property. One of the hardware components not necessarily talked about is, how do we get internet connection to these devices? Most of the time they're in underground parking garages. And so we need to think about, how do we get connection downstairs so that we can do payment, we can do customer support, things like that. This is one thing we like to start with in the design phase, because without that connectivity component, the service can suffer. So we like to make sure whatever we're doing has great connection to the internet, and there's a number of ways that we can do that. And finally, what is being managed? It's the EV chargers by a software platform. And this software platform and all the features are going to make it very easy for the operator to, I like to say, set and forget, and check in on them every 6 months or so, just to make sure the user behavior of the drivers matches the intention of the property. And I'll get into some specifics in a minute. And so on the topic of software, let's go maybe a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I love talking about the software piece. Why do I need software to manage these simple, large electrical outlets?
That is basically what they are, large electrical outlets. And why do I need software to do that? It's just a piece of hardware. And I'm going to explain to you why. To answer the question, why software, let's ask ourselves the following questions. Who has access to these chargers, or who do I want to have access? Is it anybody, or just our tenants? How much revenue is made, and how do I keep track of that? How does the driver pay for electricity? What happens if all the chargers are on at the same time? What happens if an EV driver leaves their car in the parking space? As well as, how do I know if something breaks? All of this is possible, but you can imagine it would take a lot of time and energy to maintain all these questions. And so what the software is designed for is to make all this automated, so you can set up your EV charging installation and check in on it every once in a while, and not have to, be putting out fires on a daily with the drivers. And so our platform, we call it Switch OS. This is basically where our onboarding team will set the property up with all the features that might apply to them. On the slide here, I'll call out a few of the more relevant ones or the more popular ones. Access control, making it private or shared or public. Different rates for different people, as well as time of use rates. You might want to have a more expensive rate during the day and a cheaper rate at night. We can do loitering, so setting a maximum time or penalizing the driver if they leave their car plugged in while it's fully charged. This is a great way to incentivize behavior, as well as looking at the real-time data. This is all what it's going to be for. Like I said earlier, we don't expect operators to be checking into this on a daily. It's let's check in every once in a while just to make sure the data matches what we set up and how we anticipate drivers to be interacting with these stations.
So I get this a lot from property groups that I work with, thinking like our buildings aren't built to handle this electricity that EV chargers consume. So they don't want to spend thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars on new infrastructure. Do we have a solution for this?
Yeah, and that's really where we specialize, is in order to reduce the barriers to getting EV charging at the property. The number one line item in most cases is how do we do it cost effectively?
So how many chargers can I install to satisfy this demand without breaking the bank?
Yeah, the answer is yes, we can do that, but I wanted to walk you through how, and I've got a couple neat graphics here to show you. So the problem that we have with most buildings is that energy is used at a common time, whether you're a workplace, a commercial facility, or even a multi-unit residential. What typically happens is EV charging coincides with those higher times of day where energy is in demand for that particular building. And so if we install EV chargers, it will only add to that peak. And as many of you know, our local utilities, depending whether East Coast, West Coast, Central, they've all got programs to incentivize behavior to reduce stress on the grid. And so the name of the game here is if we can avoid these peaks, we can save money. And they do that to make sure that they're not over designing the grid. And so this basic example on screen shows if we add EV chargers, we're going to go well into the red and it's going to get expensive real quick. So how do we avoid that? So in the early stages with a building, you're going to have your base load, HVAC, residential, whatever it might be. And as you add chargers one by one, they're going to very slowly or abruptly approach the peak of the building. And so what we're trying to do here is take the remaining capacity and rather going into the red beyond what we're capable of doing in the building, let's shift consumption to times of day where we can. And so rather than over installing on the infrastructure side, we're making use of all the capacity available to us. And we've done this, with thousands of buildings in America. And this is by far the most effective way to save money, on the order of tens or even in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars in infrastructure. And so I really like to highlight the importance of load management and this being a critical element in the design side. As a purchaser, you don't necessarily need to understand how this works, but what you're going to want to look for is the solution I'm picking capable of controlling when charging happens? And that's where the savings is going to come into play. And so when we talk charging speeds, it leads us to this third pillar, which is the EV driver experience. So we talked from the angle of, as the person paying to put these in the ground, what is the experience? But what is it actually like as an EV driver? And myself being an EV driver for many years, I've used every platform. I'm, very familiar with the experience, but you can reduce it to a very simple three tasks. It's to use the station to enable charging, to pay for the energy that you're going to consume, as well as if something breaks or if there's a problem, to get help. And that's the role of the EV driver experience, is to make it very clean and simple. As many of you know, mobile app is a very common approach to interacting. It's, in our case, we see it being the preferred experience of recurring drivers. but you can also access it with an RFID card, a credit card reader, or if you want, scan a QR code on the machine and check out as a guest. No app required. And our goal here as a company is not to force everyone to download the app. We're just trying to make it the easiest experience, which is why we include things like credit card readers or just scanning that QR code to check out on a web page. And so the 4 options really make it flexible. And like I said earlier, if we have recurring tenants, people that are charging there every day, they tend to download the app just because it's the easiest way to go.
So we've talked about methods of payment, but how do EV drivers pay for the electricity that a property is consuming?
Yeah, so I just mentioned the interface is the app, or the app, RFID card, web app, or credit card reader that I mentioned previously. But what Switch is going to do here is collect all of the money from the drivers, put that into a virtual bank account, and then we're going to deposit that to a bank account that the building instructs us. So this can get complicated if we're in a condo or we have different sub-meters across the building. But the general experience here is that it's an automated system that we set up, and once a month, once a quarter, the building's going to get a direct deposit for all the money collected by the charging stations.
How does EV charging interact with other technologies in the building?
Yeah, and this is where Switch goes well beyond just the EV chargers themselves. And I brought a few slides to kind of show examples of that. And so one of the examples that shows how the EV charging platform extends beyond EV charging is a project we did with Ani Group. They're a national developer, if you know who they are. They use flash parking to operate all of their facilities and parking garages. So rather than having the EV drivers download yet another app, they can actually access EV charging through their existing parking solutions that they're all familiar with. It's a digital platform, flash parking, and they can also pay and access charging through the same experience. And the goal here is, let's not make them pay twice. Let's make it seamless, super easy. Same applies with, smart building technology. If you've got, a smart communities app like a smart one, where you can operate everything from unlocking doors to booking amenities, you can also access EV charging through these same platforms. And the benefit here is, again, one app for the building, for the users. You do not have to download a separate app to interface with your EV charger. CSC ServiceWorks is one I always like to talk about. They operate couple 100,000 buildings, laundry services across the country. So it's an experience familiar with all of the current tenants in those buildings, how to pay and access for laundry services. They can also access EV charging through the same experience. And finally, maybe Elise, I'll hand it over to you for this portion, but the cornerstone to the 3 previous technology pillars is O&M. How do we keep things online in service so that the EV drivers can expect a reliable and convenient service anytime they plug in? So I'll maybe hand the mic over to you, and you can walk the viewers through this.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. I mean, yeah, just reviewing the software, obviously it's very robust. There's a lot of capabilities that can be done. But at the end of the day, drivers, site hosts, and operators, they want the same thing. They want the system to work. And so reliability really is everything. We think it's really important to ensure you have ongoing maintenance and support for these devices. At the end of the day, they are assets and amenities. And so you want your staff, residents, or just drivers to be happy with them. You're going to invest in the software, you're going to invest in the hardware and the infrastructure. And so we encourage you to also look at extended warranties and care packages. This is often offered by many providers. Here at Switch, we offer Switch Care. And again, we highly recommend purchasing these packages. They're going to make sure that you're covered with parts, labor, warranty, because yeah, you never know what might happen. Another key to reliability is charger uptime. Charger uptime can be related to the software. And so, Thomas, I'll let you kind of discuss the difference between charger and network uptime.
Yeah, sure. This is something that emerged mid last year as a result of a lot of the national NEVI funding. NEVI funding was the federal program to get EV chargers deployed across the board, mainly along major transit corridors. But what they did was set out very specific guidelines for the operators of these stations being switched for the performance that they're going to be held to. And so uptime is meant to describe at any point in the day, how much of that day can I pull up to that station and receive a successful transaction? And so 97.5 was the standard set by NEVI. So we had a minimum maintain that, as well as the network itself, the app and all of the servers running it, achieves even higher 99.7. And so charger uptime is a little bit less just because every location can see little blips in internet coverage, just like your cell phone would. So this is pretty standard practice across the board. Whereas network uptime, our servers are on with plenty of redundancy. And the reason we like to break these out is because on our platform, we like to show the data for how we calculate it, giving the operator full transparency to what is happening at the building. And our goal here is really to promote an ecosystem where the operator and the building owner have a lot of data and transparency to hold their network provider accountable to the rates that they advertise.
So the path forward, to summarize kind of this entire webinar in 4 easy steps. First, we want to make sure that there's a plan. You want to be asking the right questions so that you understand what your goals are and how many chargers you want to install and how many chargers can you install. Step 2 is picking a trusted installation partner, whether that's a partner from Switch's network or a preferred partner or electrician of your choice. And then management of the stations. As Thomas alluded to earlier in the presentation, the software is what does this, and you want to allow the software to manage your stations so that you can just make the money from them. And then service. As with any large investment, it's important that you're covered with extended warranties and care packages because you never know what might happen. We wanted to revisit the incentive conversation because, as you can see on this map, there are available incentives nationwide. There can be a thought that California is the only one with this kind of money, but as you can see, it goes all across the US. And the Switch team is here. We're specialized in finding what incentives you are eligible for, whether that's from the federal government, which we'll touch on next, or even on a state, city, or utility level. And I briefly saw a question in the chat about how we can guide you, and we're here from beginning to end. It really is in our best interest to help you. So if there's a particular site you're curious about, feel free to reach out to us. And as far as the federal incentives go, there is a 30% tax credit right now available. There's an eligibility map that you can look up the address and see if your property is eligible for. Obviously, this is a huge amount of money that you can take advantage of, and we recommend acting now because, yeah, we don't know how much longer these might be around. That pretty much.
So we can maybe
Yeah.
open up for questions. I'm just kind of scanning the chat here as we go. I saw some earlier on load management, so I can maybe take that one off the top. I think the question by Jan, do I need any smart meters for this energy management? You don't need any smart energy technology. Basically, what we do is we put these little sensors at different points in the building to just tell us what the building's doing in real time so that the system can make all of its adjustments. But generally, this is a very inexpensive practice, so you're not looking at large costs there. Our technical approach is that we want to be able to design for any type of building's electrical infrastructure. So as a general rule of thumb, I like to give a yes as it's possible. It's just a matter of, how do we design the settings to best meet the driver's needs?
Cool. Let's go. First off, fantastic questions. Keep it up. I'm gonna bucket them and float them to the gang here. First one, let's talk about like network fees. A couple questions around like the different levels of service. First one, do you offer like a basic software version? What's the like lightest version of your software? And then talk next about the fees and who pays the fees and different options that you can take for basically who pays for those fees.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that first. We do offer a basic level of network, which just involves energy monitoring. There's no transactions or billing remittance to the property. That would be like our lowest service tier. And then it kind of just goes up from there, depending on what your goals are and what kind of features you're looking for, if load management is going to be incorporated or not. And so we can work with you on a project by project basis to determine what service tier is going to fit your needs the best. Generally, we have it set up where the site host is paying for these network fees, but there are various ways that maybe we can look at baking those costs into what the driver is paying so that you do end up receiving the revenue that you're wanting.
I think another one to add there is that, like, especially in situations where they're deeded chargers versus shared chargers, they're deeded chargers, the condo owner can pay for all those themselves. So they can pay the fees because it's a deeded charger. If it's a public charger, just like she said, that's a harder thing for those fees to be directly correlated to drivers. But as she said, there's ways in which you can recoup those fees, and by charging your own rates and what rates you want to charge, you can play the math and figure out what makes the most sense for your property. That's a bit more about the fees. And then when it comes to how much of the network fees, it really depends. Country, size, type of charger, duration of contract. So there's lots of different variables, which Lisa, Thomas, and many of our team members are happy to have that conversation just to figure out what that would look like. For continuing to go, I had more tag. Yeah, so let's have an investment. So how much investment do you need to start? And I know it's a it depends question, but I guess maybe it's an opportunity to talk about kind of some of the options we have for how you can structure the investment.
I can take another question. Jason's asking about environmental risks. There have been a few cases where we've seen buildings get approached by their insurance company and say, there's the perceived risk with having the chargers in an underground parking lot. We don't see it across the board, but it seems to be certain providers using it as a way to add a bit to the rate. So I think just as a safe bet, if you are looking into this, maybe reach out to the provider to double check that they may or may not have a clause in there. From our perspective, we don't really see any risk for fire just because anything that we're doing complies with the National Electrical Code, and every device is certified to UL, meaning that it has all of the safety redundancy in place that if there were ever buildup of heat, it would shut everything off. That being said, there have been one or two isolated events across North America where the vehicle catches on fire, but that's completely separate from the charging system. That's a vehicle problem. And so from my perspective, it would be no different than having a gasoline car that could catch on fire as they do. So just something to keep in mind if you're familiar with your insurance policy of the building, as sometimes it can cause a headache after the fact if it hasn't been addressed. I can take Kamal's question. What is the investment for a DC fast charger? Don't take my my number to the bank, but I'll give you some ballpark numbers. To install a level 2, on average, you're looking at about $4,000 to $5,000. To install a level 3, you're looking anywhere between $50,000 and $100,000. So the cost is about 10x, and that's the reason why we don't see these fast chargers in every building, every parking spot. Is the costs are very high. But that being said, if you've got a high traffic zone, shopping mall, commercial property, there is business case provided there's high traffic.
Do you want to just talk about the spatial requirements of the chargers, both above and below ground?
Sure. There's two ways to mount the charger, either on a pedestal or on a wall. The pedestal is only used, about a 12 by 12 footprint, so they don't take up much floor space. But one of the problems we come across in the field is in a parking garage where every parking space has been very specifically designed to meet bylaw. There are some times where a pedestal would not work, which is why we moved to a wall mount, which is a little bit less expensive. There's no hardware needed. Generally, the charging stations only stick out from the wall maybe 3 or 4 inches, as well as they're 12 to 16 inches wide. So if you're putting them on the parking line, they do not encroach on the vehicle's ability to park in that space. And these are the things that we're going to go over with an installer when they do a site walk. Is let's put the chargers in a place that does not change the ability for someone to park in that space, as well as risk a vehicle hitting it. So we do mount it up off the ground well, so that if a vehicle were to sideswipe or back into the wall, it does not compress or break the charging station. And so these are all the considerations that we look at during the installation phase.
And then another, just talking about like investments and the money aspect of it. So there's a couple other options that we haven't chatted about of how you can actually like pay for them. So there's a CapEx model where you actually just pay for them outright. And there's also an OpEx model, or like what we call charging as a service. So essentially a subscription offering where you don't have to pay anything up front, but we bake in a kind of a monthly price per charger so that it wraps all of the costs, installation, the actual chargers, service fee. And so it's just another model for you if you're considering how do I finance and fund potentially like a large scale deployment. What about cables for wall mounted, retraction, lifting the cables?
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly scroll back to the cable retractor photo. Stephen, you can see on this pedestal, we've got a cable retractor. That same box can be mounted on a concrete wall, and so that it keeps it out of the way. If you look at the bottom of the pedestal, it's designed so that it keeps the cables off the ground, so that whether it's snow removal, cars driving over it, the charging station is protected against wear and tear. And so we find this is the best way to keep the installation looking neat and professional in the long term.
It also doesn't rely on drivers to make sure that they're coiling it up in any place. It's going to do it automatically. So it's really the
exactly
best.
Especially for those higher use areas, we find if it doesn't have cable retractors, you end up with EV charging spaghetti within a matter of days in the parking lot.
Any other questions, everybody? This has been awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Constantly, these questions have been great. The type of question we need. I put my email in there. If you have any questions, I'm happy to connect you to kind of anyone else. Updates about the Enercan ZEVIP. Yeah, yes, we do. Thomas, do you want to share?
Yeah, I know they are constantly rolling out intakes, usually on an annual basis. And so the timing of that, you usually have to align for one of those cycles. So if you are interested, reach out to Greg. We can connect you with our ZEVIP team. Their job is to write the applications and get it approved, so it makes it easy on your end. We've done tens of $1 million worth of projects over the last 5 or 6 years with it, so we're happy to help.
And ZEVIP, for those people who aren't aware, that's the National Canadian Infrastructure Program for EV charging. There's many across the states. Most of them are utility focused. As Elisa said, we've access to and work with many of them. So if you're curious to know like what incentives are available, I saw the New York one, right? Con Edison has a great incentive program. You go to Colorado, Excel Energy has a 100% rebate program. There's tons of them across the state and across the country. So just reach out. We can connect you with someone locally, and they can help figure out what's available now or coming up, so that it makes it easier for you to help finance these. Alex, yeah, last year's round was supposedly said to be potentially the last one. Obviously, with the potential pending election, who knows what happens in the future, but reach out, Alex, and again, one of our teammates can help figure out how and if we can find some funding for you. Levels of software, yeah, that's a longer conversation for sure, to figure out the different aspects of our software and the different tiers they go with. So happy again to have a conversation with somebody on our team to make sure that you have the knowledge you need. Otherwise, guys, thanks so much for tuning in. This was absolutely fantastic. You'll get an email with the recording shortly, probably tomorrow. And otherwise, have a great rest of the day.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye.